Okay, now we're live. I I wasn't expecting this, so this is a bit of a scuff for me. But yeah, sorry about that delay. But here's Angela Fehrnstrom with Cybersecurity as a web developer. All yours.
This person, and I am getting feedback from someone. There we go. Is very cyber or security and privacy conscious person, and was learning a lot more through the course of that relationship. Um, but my professor said the mentalities just don't go together. Web devs want everything as open as possible, and then security wants everything locked down and closed. Relationship didn't last, but what did last is the importance of cybersecurity in my job, because in my opinion, web development and security not only can go together, but really should. So as a webmaster for what has quite frankly been a lot of projects over the years, I've always felt that part of my job is to be at least somewhat conscious of the security risks and concerns for each individual project. Sometimes those risks are a little bit smaller. They're things that just come with having any kind of online presence. And then other times the risks are a little bit more serious, and it really just varies depending on the project. Most of my career has centered around fields that tend to be a little bit more security sensitive than others might be. I've worked for the Idaho Department of Administration, which is now the Office of Information Technology Services, the Idaho Department of Finance, and I now work for the Federal Courts District of Idaho. And then in my volunteer time, I typically end up creating websites for youth or security organizations. This has included several Girl Scout events, B-Sides Boise, B-Sides Idaho, and then also Idaho InfraGard. So throughout this, please keep in mind, I'm not a security professional. I am a web developer who is doing her best to keep security a priority in her life and her career. But I'm going to walk you through some of the websites and projects that I've worked with in the past. And I'm hoping that with you seeing my thought process, you can kind of see what someone outside the security community sees as a risk, how they implement what sort of precautions they can, and maybe get a little bit of an insight in how some of your devs might think. So first off, let's take a look at some of the projects. The first site is one that I'm pretty certain you've all visited. It's actually the B-Sides Idaho website, the event site for this event. Um, Security event websites that I've created, they all tend to have the goal of conveying information, event information like the time and place, the event schedule, how to get tickets, how to submit a talk, important links, social media stuff, community resources, just all that sort of stuff. The InfraGard Idaho website is similar in a lot of ways. They want to convey information about the organization. How can you join? What are some current and upcoming events? What's the contact information? Links to those events and information about the local board. So I've also worked on a lot of government websites. Part of my job at the Department of Administration was to help agencies that didn't have a web developer create and manage their websites. The ones that I've worked on have primarily been information repositories for the public. These websites share information about the agency, like what they regulate, which can sometimes be confusing. They have contact information. Sometimes they have laws, rulings, and regulations that the agencies control. Sometimes the agencies share licensing information and requirements. They have legal decisions, fees and fines, industry news, stuff like that. And then now working at the federal courts, we also have information about our judges. We have information for lawyers. If you get a jury duty notice, we have information about that, orders and rules. And then also because of the way the Idaho District Court is structured, we actually have probation and pretrial services information as well. So then COVID starts, and government websites have a ton of extra contact information. They have extra forms. They've got information about if the physical location is open or closed. allowing more online submissions of forms. Sometimes agencies have implemented online chats, and just across the board, it's been a ton more traffic. And then the last thing that I want to look at with you guys is a couple of Girl Scout websites. The first one, it's pretty similar to the B-Sides Idaho site. It's an event site, event information, registration form, done. The other one, though, this is a site for an event that averages 1,500 people. And when we initially talked about the website, the requirements had processing and storing of health histories, medication info, full contact info, which includes phone number, email address, and physical address, emergency contact information, birthdays, grade levels, driver's licenses, which is both the driver's license number and a scan of the card, car insurance information, Girl Scout ID numbers, and then on top of all of that, we're supposed to be processing credit card payments. That one's going to be a mess. So I'm sure you guys are picking up on some of the risks that I did, but I want to show you what I picked up on when I start working on these projects. So first up, the security sites. Security industry websites, they have a reputation of being tested, is a good word for it. A few years ago, some of the Untitled Chapter websites were actually targeted in a series of attacks by hacktivists. And then the Untitled site also kind of has an extra layer of risk because that falls into both security and government website categories, as Untitled is a public-private partnership with the FBI. On the topic of government websites, they're always a target, like always. Some of the government website specific risks that I've personally seen are being defaced, denial of service attacks, and accidentally posting non-public information, which is also a fun one. Of course, there's a ton of other risks, and government sites aren't the only ones with these risks. This is just in my experience. One of the worst fears of a government agency is ending up on the news, and any one of those will get you there almost immediately. So that's a problem. Then lastly, the one that I'm sure you guys are all cringing over is that Girl Scout website. That first one, I'm not as worried about. Registration form was on another site. It wasn't actually any input on my site. I'm also not quite as worried about these sites being hacked into or defaced as I might be for government site or the security industry stuff. The other website though, that big website, that one touches on some of my absolute deepest fears as a web developer. We're not collecting any analytics, so we don't have to worry. I'm not as worried about, as much about COPPA, but we are dealing a lot with HIPAA, PCI, PII laws, and it's for kids. So the site is going to process a ton of information for over 1,000 minors, plus all of the adult volunteers that are involved. And then on top of that, when I'm working on a Girl Scout website, one thing that I am always worried about are predators, and then posting too much information about the event, photos that are being shared to promote the event. Again, not only is this straying really, really far into regulatory waters and privacy issues, these are kids that we're worrying about. So as a web developer, how do I deal with these issues? For the simpler sites, like the security sites and that first event website for Girl Scouts, one of my go-to methods of sort of securing the site is just making it as flat as possible. I've been told that this could be called security through simplicity. I don't know if that's a real term, but I like it and I'm keeping it, so I'm using it. I obfuscate email addresses. I sanitize the form input if the organization insists on having one, stuff like that. Again, if we use the B-Sides Idaho site as an example, that site is all HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. There's no input from the users. The page is put together on the server, it's sent to your browser, CSS makes it look pretty, JavaScript makes it do fancy things because I'm using Bootstrap. That's it. It's not a perfect website. It's not the most interactive. It's not the most amazing or groundbreaking thing you've ever visited. But a simple flat website is exactly what we needed for the event. So that's what I delivered. And that tends to be the case for most events that I've worked with. When working on a government website, I thankfully have other teams that I can work with and lean on. I work with the security team, server team, networking teams to make sure that the infrastructure in and of itself is secure to begin with. And then on top of that, I have to do my job. So in one instance, as part of the web team, we were dealing with a denial of service attack. The solution that we came up with was to set up the system to dump requests from a given IP if they sent too many requests in a certain amount of time. Other times, the server team has sent through an urgent update that we need to install like right now. We've also set up alerts for suspicious activity, and we can configure that to be sent to specific teams if needed. For example, one of the agencies that I've worked with, they send an email to the security team if an IP gets a certain number of errors in a given amount of time. So in addition to working with other teams, I have to make sure that I'm following secure coding practices. Again, go-to method of this is kind of a simple flat site that I mentioned before, offers fewer attack vectors, harder to get into, stuff like that. But honestly, in today's world, that's not always an option, especially with everyone interacting with everything online. So stuff like sanitizing form input, training end users, making sure patches and updates are always installed up and up to date, those things all become very important. Government also has an added kind of risk of, is this really for public consumption? That's a problem. um, to mitigate this, I will usually double check everything that someone sends to me to post. I'll check with my manager, I'll double check with the person, hey, are we sure this needs to be posted? But really, that's something that shouldn't be only on me as the developer. That needs to be a cultural and training thing in the agency. And then we're going to look at that Girl Scout website. So pretty sure you can understand why I was like, nope, I'm not doing this. Those requirements are way too much. I don't want to mess with HIPAA, PCI, PII. This hits all three of those. And I'm not avoiding them to hide what I'm doing. And it's not necessarily because I'm afraid of them. It's because I don't know how to do them right. All I know is enough to know that these things are an issue. This is a volunteer group. We don't have the funds to hire a security professional who does know how to do these things right. And honestly, that's a lot of work. So the first thing that we looked at is assess the need of the site. Do we really need to be collecting all of that information? And unfortunately, the answer was yes. The only thing that we could actually remove from that list of requirements was the mailing address. So what do we do now? We outsourced. So first thing we did was we found a service that actually specializes in, excuse me, in youth camp health histories. Literally all they do. That's their thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to direct the girls and the adults to their site to complete the health histories. And then as we've been working with the service, we were actually able to customize the forms that we give to the adults to accept the driver's licenses, car insurance information that we need. This company, they've got security in place. They know what they're doing. They have their HIPAA stuff figured out. This is what they do. So we don't have to worry about that as much. Also, from a more physical security standpoint, having everything in a really organized, easy to access location for our nurse on site is going to be really helpful as well. The next thing we looked at was payment. There's a little bit of wonkiness with how Girl Scout Rewards works. That means we can't just like automatically send them to a payment page. So we were having a little bit of trouble with that, but the solution that we came to was we will be creating PayPal invoices closer to the event for the remainder of the balance. And then that invoice will direct them to PayPal's website where they can pay the invoice with a card. Again, PayPal has PCI figured out. They have security in place. They know their stuff. Last thing is the PII. We can't get around needing all of that information because running a huge event like that, we need information. But what we can do is avoid storing it with the website. So if we figured out that if we collect just the name and the Girl Scout ID, we can actually cross-reference that with the information that we get from our council office, get the data that we need, like the birthdays, the grade levels, stuff like that, and then we can actually store that offline. So just by addressing the scope of the site, we were able to eliminate almost everything that I was worried about. Still have a lot of information. We still have a lot of input to sanitize, but at least we're now at a point that I'm not having nightmares about being the cause of a HIPAA or PCI breach, and PII is no longer stored someplace that's easily accessible online. So Girl Scouts, again, along with those issues, I do have to worry about how much is being shared. Girl Scout sites, they're not necessarily hidden. They're not like password protected and stuff like that, but they're also not promoted. I don't do any SEO work on them. I don't submit them to Google. I don't do anything like that. most of these sites, they can really only be found if you follow the links directly from the council website or the newsletters that they only send to registered girls and adults. We are very careful about what information we share about the event, and the only photos of girls, if there are any, I have done several events that there are no photos of girls shared on the website, are ones that we know have signed photo release forms and the parents are okay with it. Last names, never shared. And often we use camp names or nicknames instead of the first names. So it's again, a little bit, yeah. This is an instance that honestly, I feel like just the mere existence of having a website makes a risk. And so we can't be perfect, but what we can do is just absolutely everything we possibly can to protect the girls and their data. So ultimately, what my professor said, it indicated to me as a student a level of animosity between the web development and security industries, but I've never actually encountered that. Some of the web developers that I've worked with have actually been some of the most security conscious people I've met outside of the security industry, which, going off what my professor was saying, would be a big surprise. At some level, all of us as web developers are very aware of the fact that honestly, of all the IT positions, we're one of the ones with the most public facing contact. But everything that I've seen and all of the web developers I've met indicates to me that we want to help you. We don't want to make your job harder. We just don't know how to help. And that's really where you can come in as a security professional. Work with your developers to assess what's actually needed for functionality of the site. Help your developers understand why something might be a risk, because you might see a risk that we are like, why is that a problem? Also, another thing that I've noticed is we're often also not up to date on the latest security news. So I'm subscribed to a couple of cybersecurity newsletters. I've got several friends in the cybersecurity community. I often receive news about security risks from them instead of the web development newsletters that I'm subscribed to. That's news about urgent security updates for a content management system like WordPress or Drupal or Joomla. Hosting platform breaches, other web-related security news. That can come from my security contacts as much as 2 days before my web industry sources. So really just letting your developer know as soon as you hear about something can really be helpful, because if you're frustrated that they're not jumping on something that was just announced, they might not even know about it yet. So I've been told that, and this is an actual quote, I can't remember who said it, but I've been told I know more about cybersecurity than any web developer has a right to know. Honestly, I don't think that should be a bad thing, because a security conscious developer is actually going to make your life as a security professional much easier. So, and that is what I have.
Let me just move this over here so I can actually speak again.
Tobar, do we have any
There are.
questions?
Hang on. Fuck. Unmuting myself on Zoom would be a really good idea. Yes, there are some questions. What are your thoughts on website builders such as WordPress, and do they ship with good and or bad security out of the box?
I would say that if you don't really know what you're doing, something out of the box like that is better than trying to figure it out. It's a little bit easier. Security wise, WordPress is always in the news for something, some sort of attack, some sort of security issue that they have. So if you are going to use something like that, just make sure you are as absolutely up to date on all patches as possible.
And considering how frequently they release them, ain't that the truth?
Yeah, it seems like almost daily sometimes.
So. It really does. It really does. One of my jobs is a webmaster, and it's WordPress based, and I see them all the time. Here's an update. Here's an update. Here's an update.
Yeah.
Another question. Do you think cybersecurity concepts ought to be taught or required more for developers, either formally or as part of continuing education?
I think it's important for everyone, not just developers, even just, anyone going through anything. I think security is really, really important. But yeah, as a developer, I do think that it's something that should at least have concepts talked about in class in whatever training you're going to, because it's right now it's such a drastic, there's such a divide between the worlds. Like when I was in school, we never talked about security stuff except for because I knew people in the industry. And I really do think that that's something that should be brought in more and addressed for everyone, but yes, for developers included in that.
I tend to agree with that one. That looks like it for questions. So that's going to be us. Thank you for your time. It's
You're very welcome.
appreciated. And I got to click this button over here.